Hi. You're always supposed to start off with a joke. I don't have a joke, but I am going to tell an anecdote. I've been coming to FOSDEM for kind of a while now. I guess it's my fifth or sixth. And it feels like free software is really a movement, or maybe open source. It's really a movement. People believe passionately about these things and their ideas. And if you compare it naturally, if you think it's a movement, you compare it to other movements, it's pretty weird that we, like, on a weekend, fly here to Brussels and sit in a classroom and sit there learning. Whereas you look at other movements like in the 50s and 60s and stuff, they were hanging out, drinking beer, doing drugs. And this is our modern movement. We spend time sitting and thinking and going to school. I think that's weird. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about free software in your car. This is a pretty unbelievable Jaguar. Jaguar puts Linux in their car. A quick note about myself. That's my preferred distro. I'm an American. I've lived in Europe for a number of years, almost a decade. I have a one-year-old daughter who I miss a great deal, even this weekend. And I work as the Geneva community manager. I'm going to talk a little bit about how this happened, why this happened, and then we're going to do some code diving and stuff like that. I'm not going to necessarily dump a bunch of stuff from Git repos, but I'll show you where the Git repos are, and we can really talk about some of the technical challenges we have. I am going to set the scene, because I think that's very important. I think there's got to be an understanding of why and where we're going and how we traveled to get here. This actually is a picture I took on my way to FOSDEM. And it's really unbelievable. Unfortunately, you can't see the writing. But roughly over here, there's a dark red arrow, and that's pointing to a phone holder. It's empty, of course, because the fellow has a tablet. I think some kind of Samsung tablet, obviously running Linux and Android. There's also a device right here, which is some kind of proprietary taxi device. And then way up top there, all these devices obscure the IVI infotainment system. So all these devices will probably be able to give you navigation. But, you know, this isn't safe. That's not a good way to drive a car. It's crazy. I mean, are you honestly going to tell me that even underway as you're driving that car that you're not going to try touching the tablet? And many studies say that when you SMS with your phone, it's like you're driving drunk. The accident rate is the same. This is madness. It's completely inappropriate. So how do we fix that? How does that get better? Obviously, the head unit has to incorporate a lot of these features. Obviously, there has to be a different interface. The touch interface is maybe not the right modality for a car at all times. So it is. It's really full of challenges. Another challenge that happens is, you know, as everybody knows, we're always connected. Android has made the scene. The iPhone is very popular. Everybody's got tools and things that are always connected. And consumers expect to be connected everywhere they go. So car makers understand that they are also a node in the Internet of Things. But, you know, as you can see, it's a different use case. So there is an automotive model. There really is a fundamental automotive model that's different than the other models. A car is not a phone. It just won't work to take a standard mobile operating system and just stuff it in a car. And there are a bunch of reasons for that, many of them really quite technical. Boot times. You know, you've got to boot really quickly. You also have to have, well, there's no back seat in this crazy thing, but in the back seat, if you've got kids, maybe you have a movie, and maybe you want a certain movie to be played or not played. Maybe they want to listen to their headphones while you listen to the news. So you have sources and sinks of media and information that has to be routed through a specific network on a car. And a car's network has the technical, very interesting technical feature in that the car has this gigantic honking battery. And when you rev it up, I mean, it's got to work, and it's got to work in minus 60. It's got to work in very cold weather. And where I live in Sweden, okay, it doesn't get minus 60 very often, but it gets routinely minus 20. And that car has to start in the cold weather. So that battery is huge. And there's all this power flux. So to keep from a great deal of distortion and confusion from coming over the networking, They also use optical fibers. So all that stuff is extremely proprietary, extremely difficult, and it's different not just from car maker to car maker, it's different from car to car. So there are a lot of technical challenges. And it's quite clear that the car maker said, okay, simple, we need a modern, connected, high-fidelity system. We can't forget that, the car makers, there are some legendary names in audio and stereo, like Becker, Mercedes, when they had Becker way back when. My dad bought a used Mercedes once. He's like, oh, it's got a Becker stereo. I'm like, what? Sounds worse than my high school radio. But in its day, these things were amazing. And the tradition of audio in cars is really sophisticated. I mean, there's some really great high fidelity. Can you reproduce that kind of high fidelity with an Android operating system? I don't know. I don't know that you can, in fact. So I'm being facetious here. It's not particularly easy. And there was nothing that they could really run around outside and say, okay, we'll use this, we'll use that, or we'll cobble together bits and pieces. They needed a great deal of standardization. And a group of car makers got together along with, ARM and Intel, and decided to create the Geneva Alliance. And that was a way to, let's standardize this stuff. Let's formalize this. Let's just be common sense. And car makers are actually very good about this. There's a lot of getting together, sharing at least ideas and resources. So this was a logical development. And so what they formed is Geneva, which this is right on the first page of the Geneva website, Nonprofit Industry Alliance. And the goal essentially is let's not forget these are big commercial companies, obviously deeply involved in sustaining their business model, and sometimes free software will challenge traditional business models that can be disruptive. So they're going to find common ground on what they think they can leave as a commodity, but they're going to compete. And they need to know very explicitly what the boundary is. Where is that boundary? Maybe HMI is where you're going to see competition, for example. Before we go too much further, modern cars have a great deal of software. As I mentioned, obviously there's audio software, sophisticated audio, sophisticated tuner software as well. They do some remarkable things with antennas. Nowadays, your whole car can be an antenna. But what Geneva's focus on, and what I think a lot of the free software and open source focuses on, is on the IVI head unit, the in-vehicle infotainment. That naturally fits in other industries too, maybe in trucks, maybe in planes. But what we're not talking about is ECUs, which are the embedded control units inside the car, or electronic control unit. That's going to control your air-to-fuel ratio. That changes the game significantly. Read a story about a fellow who did it who changed the air-fuel ratio, because you can chip your car. The car makers do not like this. They don't recommend it. And it's probably not a great idea. But you can maybe squeeze a little bit more performance out by chipping it. You get a chip, it overrides the settings. And sometimes, you go a little bit faster, but there's clouds of black smoke coming out the back of your Porsche. And that's kind of uncool. And it also can be quite dangerous, of course. I mean, if you don't know what you're doing, it's not just voiding the warranty that's at issue. So, that's to define our terms. Let's see if I can make my little slides go further. They will not. Excuse me. Apologies. But already, the Geneva Alliance was formed, let's say, the ideas were thought about in 2008, 2009. It got formalized. But there is already a thriving ecosystem. And so Geneva is not the only one, but it's very large. It's been rather successful in terms of uptake inside the automotive industry. And there are going to be vehicles on the road running Geneva systems this year, which is really exciting. There's some plans in the future to be able to create a download and go image, where you'll just be able to say, potentially just drop into a virtual machine on your laptop and start running this. I mean, that can be done today. There's a Meta IVI is a layer inside Yocto, and there's a way to build the Prexa image. So that it's certainly able to do it now. What we haven't done is compiled all the binaries and just set it up for you in a single unit. Apologize. So for some reason, it's freaking out. Oh, now it's crashed. That's all right. Well, maybe this is the time for me to start singing my song. There we are. I wanted to go a little bit into some of the details about Genevi. And before I do, I want to show the slide. It's a little bit better. Let's see if we get. So there's a great deal of rigor in the automotive industry. There's a great deal of process rigor. There's a great deal, because we're talking about automation, we're talking about industrial processes. There's a great deal of serious project management. That's something we in the free software world are not so great of. But Genevi actually takes a lot of that stuff and applies it to open source, and that's really good because it gives us, I think, in the free software world, a great deal of discipline. It's not to say that we're not disciplined already. I think we really are. We tend to be really passionate about our projects, but there are, production lines and production schedules for cars, and they're pretty much immutable. It takes a long time to get a car on the road. So that kind of industrial discipline or that process-oriented approach from this industry, I think, is really going to help us a lot. But it's not just Genevi. I'm the Genevi community manager, and of course, I really believe in the project. But, to be fair, there's a real ecosystem with real diversity. Many people have probably seen that, Google obviously is heavily involved in cars and automated cars. I don't know that that has IVI applications or not. Ford has got something along with a company called Bug Labs. That's mostly just reading diagnostic information, and it's only read-only. And that's kind of interesting, but I think Genevi is much wider. And then underneath Genevi, there's a group called AutoZar and Jaspar, and there's hosts and hosts of consortia that are involved in this. So not all of it's free software, a great deal of it is, but it's a real ecosystem with real diversity. Now, in my talk, I said this was about free software in your car, and that's what this is about. This is about free software in the car. Genevi uses, in its various compliant distributions, or all of the compliant distributions that have been submitted, they use the Linux kernel. And of course, a great deal of the Linux kernel is GPL-v2. So that's free software. Genevi does its development in the open. So it's not just, say, traditional open source, whereby once the device is built and running, you throw the code into open source and just say, there you are. This is open in the sense that you can be included in future visions. If you have an idea, if you want to contribute, get inside Genevi, or just from the outside, you've got a product or something, we've got code, you can be part of the building of the system going forward. That's very important, I think, and a very key distinction. What I'm showing here is component proposals. If you want to propose a new project inside Genevi, there's a formal process to do it, but it's pretty straightforward. You do not have to assign copyright to Genevi. Okay? Genevi has its preferred licenses. They're all open source. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. And this is up and alive today. Here are the Git projects. We work with Git just like anyone else. This is live. This is a screenshot of, I think I took today. Some very interesting stuff. So Geneva is not just IVI. You can see some of the Node Startup Controller and Node State Manager. They're going to do things like speak with systemd. Because in automotive, you have to have very fast start times. I think it's something like 250 milliseconds from chime, and chime is when the car goes choop choop, and then you need that back camera on. Backward-facing cameras are going to be the law in the United States, I believe, in 2014. So there's some real interesting challenges. How do you blit that back video to a frame buffer? What do you do? How do you bring the entire system up? And if you're looking to bring up a JVM, well, you're going to be waiting around a while. So if you can see that, we're really, this Node Startup Manager will also talk to ECUs. So it's deeper than just an IVI system in some cases. There's a variety of things. There's a diagnostic log and trace daemon. That also comes from the AutoZAR world. It's an AutoZAR specification that has been facilitated into software that's going to be standard pretty much on any car. That's done. There's an audio manager with, I think, close to 10,000 lines of code already. That comes from, a guy at BMW has been working on that extensively. That does all sorts of really fancy routing for your audio app. It takes this source maybe that's on your tablet and can spit it out on the head unit in the front seat, or vice versa, or push things to different seats so that you can have different seats showing different content. That matters. That really matters. And of course, there's AF Bus, which I'll talk about a little bit there, common API runtimes, a lot of other fun things. There's more than just, the POSIX operating systems and real-time OSs out there on the road today too. And they use a lot of free software, like you'll see SQLite and some of these things. So this is not such a hard jump from contemporary systems to what Geneva is trying to do today. One of the things that Geneva contributed to the Linux kernel is a new protocol socket called AF Bus. Now, the network systems or the network subsystems maintainer is not thrilled about it because AF Bus uses UDP, and he thinks that's unreliable, which of course it is. However, AF Bus was designed to speed up dbus, and it's done so 100%, so that's a significant order of magnitude. That patch has been pushed into the LTSI kernel, the kernel that Greg Crow-Hardman maintains. So it's at 3.4, and that's an area that you can send the kernel to before it goes to mainline, for example, and the goal is obviously to have it in mainline. So it certainly is hope that it'll get into mainline. Any kernel committers here, feel free to send it along to Linus's tree. But along with the AF Bus contribution, there are dbus patches, there are EGLibC patches, and I had hoped that Leonard's talk today was going to talk about how he's integrated AF Bus into systemd, but I don't think that right now dbus understands when systemd is talking AF Bus to it. So there's some low-hanging fruit for anyone right now. If you want to get involved, it'd be really interesting to see if we can get dbus to understand what protocol it's being spoken when it's being talking to systemd. When I was talking to some of the guys who are architecting the system in Geneva, because there's an abstract specification, if you will, that gets realized when a built image is made, one of the things that he wanted to bring up and he'd like this community to address is NAND flash the appropriate tool or the appropriate medium to be using in a vehicle which has a life expectancy of 15 years? Is NAND flash inherently too unstable? If you were to have some kind of issue with NAND flash, that might be close to a recall. You'd probably have to go to the dealer to get it fixed. That's very expensive. So research in that area would be very well received, certainly inside Geneva. There's another tool called Layer Manager, or maybe better yet, IVI Layer Manager, which is a compositor. And that does a variety of layering and compositing. This is a tool that works across platform. All Geneva software works across platforms. It's tested, and right now I think the most vanilla platforms are ARM v7 and Atom, but because it's ordinary Linux, it'll run wherever Linux runs. And that is pretty much the outline of what I had today. We can go into some detail if we want on any of those points, but I kind of agree with Leonard that the best talks are the ones where there's a dialogue. So I'd really like to hear from you guys what you think is missing, what you need to understand, free software in your car, things like that. Are they all on mute?
There we go.
Lovely.
So once GDB is available in cars, will it be a completely free and open ecosystem? Will I be able to route my car? Will I be able to install other applications?
In theory, sure. I mean, you'll always be able to route your car. There is going to probably be, due to safety considerations, the car makers like to lock the head unit. So there is going to be some locking involved, I'm almost certain. So you will have to route it.
He had the same question.
Can you tell us something about the typical architecture of a car? I mean, is it one centralized CPU with regular devices, or multiple CPU running multiple kernels?
That's a good question, and it varies a great deal. The ECUs, there tend to be quite a lot of them. So yes, there will be multiple of those. And it'll be very common to see some form of containerization, but hopefully the goal is to standardize on one kernel. There probably is going to be a real-time operating system underneath, say, the Geneva unit, in many cases. In many cases, there won't be. Linux itself will host the virtualization. Those are the scenarios. I can't say for sure that there's necessarily one standard architecture across them all.
Do you plan for an app store where car vendors can create their own apps and third parties?
Yeah, I definitely think that's on the agenda, absolutely. The thing is that driver distraction is a really huge issue, and it's a real problem. I mean, drunk driving, let's say in the United States, kills tens of thousands of people. It's a real problem. So car safety is paramount. And if you're texting on your phone, and that's as dangerous as drunk driving, people get very worried. So are they going to let just any app into, say, their walled garden? I don't think so. And I think that they have a pretty strong reason for that. My choice is just like yours. Just show me the API, and I'll write my apps, and I don't care about the rest. But that I don't think is going to be realistic, and the reason is safety. And so I think that they're probably going to vet what comes in, and they most certainly want applications. They most certainly want an app ecosystem. To what level it's going to be controlled, or you're going to have to write it for every car maker, your Ford app, your GM app, that would be a disaster. I really don't think that's going to be the case. But I don't think Geneva has any plans to set up their own app store.
I have a question. Cars have features now which include driving the car himself, for example, automatic parking, or the lights if you're in a dead corner. Will those be in Geneva as well, or in a different system?
I haven't seen any software around that particular thing right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if the interface to those systems would be available. Yeah.
So you can drive your car then automatically.
Well, I think there are two different things. I think there's automated parking and then there's autonomous vehicles. And the autonomous vehicles, I think, require a great deal more infrastructure. And I don't think that Geneva is necessarily addressing that. Now you're starting to get into LiDAR and a whole bunch of extraneous things. So I'm not seeing any code addressing that issue right now, no. I mean, you would imagine that they would pull some of the LiDAR or whatever you have onto the central head unit because they know, okay, you've already got a screen here. But there's not a lot of that yet. There is a great deal of work with other consortia. You know, there exist a lot of them out there. Avenue, I don't know if you know that, but they're Ethernet over AVB, audio-video bridging maybe, and so that could be an area where you could sort of just access that. So I mean, there are ways to patch that together, but to be honest, I don't see the roadmap for that.
My question goes a bit in the direction of the app stores. So, for example, there's the Ford uplink sync thingy.
Yeah.
So, is it compatible with Genevi, or is it something that is developed differently? Will it merge in the future?
Wow, good question. I think Ford uses another operating system. I can't think of the name of it, but
Well, it provides.
you would think that it would probably be better for the car makers to agree, probably on a single platform. I don't know if they've done that yet, but I mean, certainly,
But-
if I were to meet guys from Ford, that's what I would tell them.
Okay, so maybe we can fix it.
Yeah, I can't say that, but you know what? I mean, all the discussion on app stores, I'm going to go directly back and tell them, developers want one place to go. It's crazy to have to
Yeah.
write, say, 5 Android apps.
But in Uplink, you have an API for on the phone where you communicate to your IV to the entertainment system. So would that work for the Genevi as well? If I have this app that communicates via Bluetooth or whatever with my entertainment system, would that work for Genevi as well? So I have my app, I have a Ford, then it works. I have a different car, does it work as well?
Yeah, we're looking into specifying mirror link.
Yeah. Okay.
And so mirror link is probably the way that app works.
Okay.
Many apps do that. They just say, okay, I'm going to talk VNC to the head unit.
Okay. Yeah,
It just all depends on how your app talks to the car.
okay.
But yes, it will work. I mean, you'll get an IVI API, which you'll be able to speak. And in fact, there's a web interface being produced by LG, who are Genevi members, that they already have tests for that you can use today. The question is, will every car maker expose all those APIs?
Yeah.
And it's up to them in the end.
And is it compatible, the vehicle API, with the Webiness API?
There is some discussion on that, and in fact, you know, the W3C has said, okay, you know, we're a standards body, so why don't you guys come and talk with us? So Genevi is certainly trying to make the vehicle API, the vehicle web API, a W3C standard. I think Webinos would like to have theirs, the W3 standard. So work is ongoing in standards bodies to make sure that they're as compatible as possible.
Do you plan to support complete reference application stack?
Plan to support which type?
Well, right now you just provide some low-level stuff and some parts from middleware, but do you plan to provide or integrate from external repositories or open source projects a complete reference applications?
Yeah, definitely. And there is an HMI working group inside Genevi that's doing HMI stuff for HMI bindings downwards, so that you'll be able to plug into that for sure. Absolutely. And there will be reference applications. There will be maybe reference apps, if you will. Definitely. When? 2013, I believe.
Hi. You said in your talk that you are not focusing on ICUs, so you are just focusing on the entertainment system. As I have played a little bit around with ICUs already, I found it very informative to have information from the ICUs available during some drives around, or some problems if you have a car problem or whatever. You are currently really focused on having someone to help you if you have a highly technical car which has some technical problems, which are mostly software problems these days. So I would probably find it useful to have at least some kind of diagnostics available in Genevi, just to have a little bit more information when I have problems, not only focused on the entertainment system.
That's built in, diagnostic log and trace.
Okay.
And that's an AutoZAR specification, so it's very low level. and a variety of things like ECU should be speaking to that. And you can certainly get that. There's something called the onboard diagnostic, OBD,
Yes,
too, in real
that's
time
what
that you may
I'm
want to.
playing
Yeah,
around
okay.
with.
Yep.
Yeah, but-
So OBD can talk to, there's a plugin to make it talk to diagnostic log and trace, so you can store those as logs, or you can do it in real time through OBD.
Because with that, you can also try at least a little bit to
Exactly.
build, supporting apps which help for safety. Like if you're driving at a different speed, and then before you notice that the volume may raise up a little bit for the music or something like that, or if you get
Right.
a phone call, then you can try to inform the user, maybe slow down a little bit for better noise reduction or
The
whatever.
audio manager knows the node state now of the ECU and can change volume settings accordingly.
Okay,
So those features are already in.
okay.
Or you can reproduce that code or just cut and paste and use that. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, but I just want to make sure that you're focusing not only on the entertainment, you also try to integrate all the stuff, because
Absolutely.
I think then you can get a cool package.
No, I totally agree with you, and I kind of, what I didn't want to do is say that Geneva is focusing on all the software in the car, because there's so much software in a car. There's ADAS, there's active driver safety. et
So do
cetera,
you
et
have
cetera.
some CAN bus support already?
Some camera?
CAN bus. It's a kind of ODD.
Oh, CAN bus.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, although I think that the focus is going forward in the future is going to be on EAVB.
Okay. Thanks.
Sure. How are we doing time-wise?
I have yet another question. Are you planning for supporting virtualization, say power virtualization or hardware virtualization yet?
Yeah. There are definitely plans for virtualization. There's a lot of virtualization going around, and I think virtualization is actually pretty popular in a car because there's a lot of, say, like military virtualization companies out there, and because of the car's need for safety, they've spoken with the car industry. So there's a strong understanding of that. Inside the IVI head unit, there is also probably going to be some kind of virtualization. The progress on that front has been that we've seen that the ARM semiconductor manufacturers are now all supporting the device tree. So it looks like that the working group inside Geneva that's focusing on virtualization is going to do something based on a device tree. And it may be full virtualization, like a container.
Yeah, but then is the main kernel the host? Is this a Linux operating system, or is this a
Yes.
third-party operating system like whatever PikeOS or?
In the case that I'm discussing, I do believe that Linux will be the host.
That's interesting.
That's right. And there's in fact, you know, Geneva's opened up, I mean, it's an open source project. So if you're interested in collaborating, you can. For example, the University of Torino has a project called LXC Bench, where they're going to benchmark Linux containers on a fairly typical set of automotive silicon, IMX53. So, you know, I mean, that's not necessarily going to be in a production vehicle, but the students are going to do very valuable research, and all that code will be available to you through the Git repo. So if you want to check that out, that might have some hints and tips for better performance or what have you.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Quick question. The Geneva is now focused on, say, a single car. Could you in the future imagine, let's say, a multiple car interaction? I take an example, two families going on a trip and the kids from the two cars playing a game together. Is that something that might be possible in the future, or is it really like restricted on a single car?
No, I don't think it's restricted at all. I think that's a very interesting idea. And I think, in fact, there are, you know, traffic systems already in existence. For example, in Europe, there's a great deal of digital traffic information on digital radio, DAB, I guess, that's not broadcast, TMC, that's not broadcast, for example, in the United States. And there are, I mean, the idea is if the car is a node in a web of traffic information or between two cars, certainly the IVI system is going to want to display some of that information, you know? So I think those ideas are there. Is Geneva going to be the consortium to go out and, you know, sponsor that research and create the connections? I don't know that it is, but it's definitely going to interface into those organizations that are doing it. And I do believe that there's already work ongoing with that.
Do you have any rules in Geneva about projects having to be having to follow an open development process, having having tickets available for everyone to look at, Git repositories and or they can be closed development software that released from time to time as free software, or
I think I might sort of bail out here and hand over to our CEO. You know, closed source software is going to be a fact of life on an automobile. That's the way it is. How that interacts with Geneva, well, that makes life pretty difficult because you need to see the code to develop the system. Now, how do we accommodate this closed source software? Well, you can say we're going to publish our APIs and you plug in the APIs and then it's your responsibility to make sure it works. But Geneva is not necessarily going to say, oh, now you're inside Geneva. But there may be a program, or there is a program that's been launched that's experimental called Works with Geneva. So it can be that if you want to apply to work with Geneva in a more formal manner, maybe this would be the App Store approach, you can apply to Geneva, you give Geneva some information, you get a little sticker that says Works with Geneva, and it's expected to be able to work across every Geneva car, and it doesn't know whether it's proprietary or open. So I think that's the short answer now. I mean, there are some details to be worked out, but I don't think it's going to really deviate much from that.
I forgot my glasses, so if anyone at the back needs a question, you're going to have to give me a really big wave, just so you know.
Okay, actually, my question is, I know your talk is focused on infotainment, but could you outline maybe any other areas from the car software that are also relevant for open source, or if there are any large active projects already that are relevant for open source in car software?
Yeah, absolutely. What comes off the top of my head, I would say automotive-grade Linux. Automotive-grade Linux is from the Linux Foundation. They're going to start with, say, Ties and IVI, and try and do, say, set up a complete system too. It's just getting up off the ground, so it might be a good time to get involved there. I don't know how mature that program is, and I don't think it has the breadth of Geneva at this point. And I think in many ways you really need to bring vendors together to force them to standardize. And I think that's the right approach. There's also Ford and Bug Labs have something going up where you can interface with Ford vehicles, but it's limited to Ford vehicles. But that's pretty cool. And then, of course, there's there's tons of things on the CAN bus. People are looking at the CAN buses, creating whole business models based on that in software. So you can look at that, and I think there are already kernel interfaces to the CAN bus. EAVB, I believe, is going to be an open standard. That's probably going to be the new networking feature for cars in the future. There's something called Nobody, which is a free tool to read onboard diagnostic information. And those are the big high-profile things that I can think of. Maybe somebody here has OpenECU. Rob, what's that? It's a replacement for an ECU? OpenECU. Rob Taylor told you OpenECU.
And then I have a really small question. In your opinion, which major vendors are most open source friendly? So I know BMW, for instance, works on open source projects.
Sure,
but
that's
I
an
don't know
easy
the other
question. Sure, yeah. I'll just pick one of my employers to favor over the other. They're all really good in their own way. But no, seriously, they're like any industry. I mean, Linux. There's some kind of tsunami going on. I mean, the embedded Linux world is really hot, and automotive IVI is also very hot. And car makers are looking for people, and I think open source stretches their development capabilities a little bit. So it's hard to find people. So if we're talking about an interesting company that will have a cool work environment and be understanding and really get it. Yeah, sure, BMW is definitely one of those companies, but a lot of them are going through that transition and are going to get there, So, seriously.
We've got 10 more minutes if anyone's got any extra questions. Like I said, wait, it's my
So you're mentioning a lifespan of 15 years for cars. That's about 10 times the lifespan of the average smartphone these days. As an Android developer, I really hate making my application work on a phone 2 years old. Am I going to hate making an application work on a car that's 10 years old?
Well, yes and no. You know, I've heard stories where people have actually lost the build system for older cars, and they need to go back and like, oh, we've got this major fix, and like, how did we build this? Oh, Jimmy's got the tool on his laptop. Okay, where's Jimmy? Oh, he left the company. So, I think that there's a real cognizance that there needs to be, say, strong backwards compatibility. So I don't think it's going to be as painful as that. I really don't. And I think that's one of the reasons why sort of a more GNU Linux approach than, say, other approaches have been taken, so that you have strong backwards compatibility. And I think there are companies around here that might be able to give you that kind of transparency with their build system and reproducibility, so that you can actually have, you know, strong caching and checksumming, if you will, to say, okay, this was the tool that I used. This is the build tool. I can easily go back and just fire up my app and test it for that. So I really do think that pain is going to be eased. No promises, though.
You say you're using your own compositor for GNV.
Yeah.
Are you planning to use Western?
As a matter of fact, yes. I think Geneva doesn't specify a single graphical backend. It says you should have a graphical backend in your stack. But it's Wayland or X, both are fine. And in fact, Geneva is working actively with the Western developers to create IVI-specific callbacks and to test with Weston, which is, I believe, the Wayland implementation, to test those APIs. We really want to make sure that's available in the next release. So we're actively involved in that community with the folks who have written those things. So yes, absolutely. Strong support for that. Very strong, straightforward, open source methodologies and ways of working. The Conman maintainer, in fact, works for us, and well, it doesn't work for us, but works with us. And a lot of, there's BlueZ is also in the system. So if you want Bluetooth, the whole BlueZ stack is available to you.
Again, about Canvas and sort of things. Are you planning to implement a sort of stack, a protocol stack, to use it on a Linux system, not especially for the Genie system, maybe a different system? I think there's always going to be a market for it. But are you planning to invest in that market? I believe you are more focused on the interface part.
Right.
But are you looking to, I've been using CAN to send GPS signals and stuff to embedded systems, and I find that Linux isn't possible to do anything with it because there simply isn't anything to use it on the CAN network. So are you planning to do something about that?
I don't think Geneva is actually going to ensure that the CAN stack is, you know, in a good state inside the Linux kernel. I do think there are automotive companies that are doing that already. So the CAN stack might be more improved in the future. But I'm skeptical.
Because there are already, for instance, the .NET Micro framework. I have to be careful now because the .micro framework, for instance, has a really good implementation of the CAN framework. So that is actually they do the same stuff, but with a closed source system, and it works really well. I'm using the .NET framework because I would like to use Linux, but I have to use the Microsoft system because it is implemented. So it's, at the moment, it's a lot more interesting to use that.
Maybe Rob knows more than I. Do you know more on that? What's wrong with socket CAN?
I haven't looked into that, but but it's not. I want to build a system that can build upon existing systems. It's not I don't want to change the whole network already existent in the car. So, but is it, it's a layer of built upon CAN then? So like CAN open, or I've used CAN open in the past, but it's really the, yeah, but if you have to have systems like brake-by-wire, for instance, you don't want to wait 2 seconds before your car starts braking, because there are like a lot of layers in between the CAN stack. Sometimes you just need to have. So on Linux then. But, and how do you interface it with, for example, I've looked on.
Yeah, it should be transparent.
But.
So you just use the socket and then you're talking to the CAN network.
Oh yeah. Well, didn't find that. So
Anyone else? I can't see if there are.
Yeah. Okay, we're almost out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.